Muy buenas, continuamos con nuestras entrevistas en MiradasDoc. Hoy tenemos a Billy Woodberry, que nos va a contar un poco un documental fotográfico que nos remonta al siglo XIX, con la ocupación que existió en Angola por parte de la Armada portuguesa. Billy, hello. Nice to see you, nice to have you here.
Thank you, it's nice to be here.
Your documentary about a story from Africa.
Yes.
Could you tell about that a little bit, a brief summary about it?
Oh, it's a film it's made with archival photographs that were made by Veloso de Castro is the last name, and he was a photographer. He became a photographer for the Portuguese military, and he accompanied them on the campaign against the Quimato people in the south of Angola, below the Cunene River. It's a region that borders what's now Namibia. But they always shared a border or boundary later when that portion of Africa, southern Angola, was claimed by the Portuguese, or granted to the Portuguese in 1884-85, the big conference in Berlin, where the great European powers decided to try to make a rational division, acceptable division of the African continent among themselves. And Portugal claimed Angola and Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau and São Tomé and Príncipe and also the Cape Verde Islands. So that was known as the Portuguese overseas territories, right? And in 1895, one thing that came out of the Berlin Conference is that you needed not only to claim this place, but you needed to secure the borders of it, and you needed to pacify, was the word they used. You needed to pacify the existing populations in those territories and have them acquiesce and accept the rule of the Portuguese for the territory. And it was an interesting and complex process. I found these photographs in the Foundation Mario Soares in Lisbon, and I first saw them at the Museum of Liberation and Resistance in Ajuba, a former, a former church maybe, and earlier it had another life, but later it became a prison, where many of the opponents of the Portuguese fascist government, Estado Novo and Salazar's time, were imprisoned there. And after the coming of democracy in Portugal in 1974, in the later years, what happened is this place was taken by the municipality, and it was allowed that they would create a museum that recorded the experiences of the people who had resisted over the years the repression in Portugal. On the fourth floor of that exhibition, they included an installation devoted to the national liberation movements in the former Portuguese colonies in Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, and Angola, and São Tomé, and Cape Verde. Right.
Even though the photographer from this documentary belongs to the Portuguese army, we could tell, but by looking at the pictures, that is actually a very close look to the reality that was being living there, right?
I think two things. One thing that's impressive about him, given the time that his photographs were made, and given the fact that he was covering a military campaign, and he was obligated to make the pictures that were most a useful record and account, because these pictures were then published in illustrated magazines of the time. You could find them because they needed to inform the Portuguese population of the progress and the accomplishments of the military. But he was so enthralled, I believe, with photography and became so accomplished that, and he was a man who was also seemingly quite curious about the world. So he includes things beyond simply the obligatory formations, marches, these kinds of things. And it reveals a lot about the process. It reveals a lot. It's interesting because he takes photos, and if you know anything about amateur photography or even professional photography, oftentimes they either undertake a project to describe a landscape or to describe the flora and fauna or to describe a particular thing. He had a broad interest, and yes, he needed to maybe inform about the conditions of the roads, the conditions of transport, the conditions of what kind of vegetation existed, what the forests looked like. Another thing he was doing was in accompanying them, they discover the remains of a previous expedition from 1904, where and it was an unsuccessful expedition, out of a force of 500, 375 people were killed by the opposing tribespeople, and the remains were not recovered because they had to evacuate very quickly. They came back with a much larger force, as you see in the photographs, and through the information provided to them by what becomes a central and tragic figure in the film, Kalipa Lua, a man from this group that they're fighting against, they learn the location of these remains. And in learning the location of the remains, given their faith and belief, and they're accompanied also by a priest and assistance to the priest and the regalia, and they stage a funeral and they bury the remains. An interesting thing that's not in the film, but I will mention that was striking, is when they came on the remains, they also discovered and recovered many of the implements of these troops. They recovered the saddles, they recovered the horns, they recovered a lot of things, which for some reason these people were not interested in acquiring as trophies or things to display. They left those things, and the Portuguese then recovered them, and they buried them, and then it was time for them to proceed with the idea of subduing these people. Yeah.
Before making the documentary, do you feel that we didn't have the notion, the knowledge of what actually happened on that time of life there in Angola?
I think there are people who knew, military historians actually, professional and amateurs. And also Veloso de Castro himself published 2 books about these campaigns. He published 2 additional volumes of his photography devoted to a campaign in a whole nother region of Angola in 1908, 2 volumes, very impressive photographic albums that he made. And he wrote 2 books. He published the first book in 1908 in Luanda. He then, in later years, in 1927, he became a member of the Geographical Society and something of an expert on that part of the world, a recognized expert. It has to do with complicated politics and relations in Portugal in the 20s and that kind of thing. And that's not in the film, but I know that in fact it happened. Okay, so older historians, is there a record of this? Yes, we have his photographs, we have in the military museums, in the archives in Portugal, which are quite substantial. We have a record of this, and we have recent books. People remain fascinated by this, and we have books from as late as 2008. They're writing about it, and they are kind of amateur historians. For various reasons, they share and discuss this campaign and these wars. They discuss them currently. They share information, they debate, they argue, they discuss. So it's known, something is known about it. But it's a very select community who knows about it. Making the film maybe offered the opportunity to share the work in a different way with the current or contemporary audience, who in fact in various disciplines and in the fine arts and in cinema and this kind of thing, people speak a lot about colonialism and post-colonialism and decolonization and these kind of things. So it seemed to me it was an opportunity to engage in a way, not in a polemical way necessarily, but to provide, it seems, an interesting example of what occurred in this instance, right? And it gives what's maybe satisfying is it suggests that maybe some of the ideas and notions that are current about what the process meant from various sides, our empire, our conquests, our discoveries, this kind of thing, it complicates it in a way. It says that there was always complicity, coercion, and a complex set of relations that allowed this to happen. There was also a measure of resistance. There were tragic consequences for some figures who were involved in this process, and maybe that gets lost when we go on a Manichaean idea or an idea of black and white, good and bad, oppressor and oppressed, and that thing, and it suggests maybe that is complex, which is not that doesn't exist, but this is in an accessible way, in a way. It demands something, you pay attention, you don't have, once you discover you don't have movement, okay, then how do you adjust to that? You don't have a narration, you have a narration, but in the old way of the end titles, you must read, you must contemplate, and you must see what he allows us to see.
So, well, hopefully we can get that purpose from your job. We can get the knowledge enough to know what happened.
Yes.
And hopefully it gets better and you succeed with this story from Africa.
Yeah, well, succeeding is maybe having the opportunity to share it with people.
Exactly.
Because one thing, okay, it's an old story. Film is portable. It can move.
Yeah.
It can move now in your world in ways that we couldn't imagine, right? But what happens is we're able to share it with people, whereas if you only had access to the archive or you only were lucky enough to collect magazines, picture magazines from the early 10s and teens of the last century, only a limited number of us can do that. But we can share it in this portable form with others who might not have occasion to see that, and then they can maybe be inspired to learn more about it, to do other things with it that I couldn't imagine. But the thing is, we at least shared it with 140 teenagers today. And they might see it on the TV or something like that. But it's a way to share this material, this rich material, and maybe to give us another way to think about what happened and to see.
This might be the beginning of something bigger and bigger.
Let's hope.
Yeah,
always.
We all hope so, and thank you for having us here.
Thank you to the organizers of the festival for inviting me. It's been wonderful, and thank you for making the interview. I hope it's useful.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.